Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be listening from. And for those who tune in to Power Faith Radio, you'll be getting this recording in the next 12 to 24 hours. Welcome to everybody in the Zoom room this evening. And we're continuing our studies in Genesis.
Chapter 3.
Chapter 3.
Verse 16.
16. Right. Okay. Evening, Bob, Joanna, Veronica, and Linda. Hope everybody's doing well. Where are we up to, Terry?
How you doing, Ronald?
Oh, I'm good. I slept in. I had the alarm set for 7 so I can come straight in and post the link. And I don't even recall the alarm going off. The dog visited me at one point in time and I thought, I thought I'd hit the snooze button, but wasn't sure. So I got up and I thought it said 8:45. I thought, I'm running late. And then I realised, no, it was 8:45 in the morning. So I was very late with posting the link. And the dog didn't get walked.
Right before class, like I said, when we got in this evening, my wife and I'd stopped and picked us up some Captain D's to eat a little bit. And while we were eating, we was watching one of our shows. I think it's the second season. We happened to be started talking about you a little bit there, Ronald. We're watching the show. It's based in Australia. It's called, I think it's Joan and Darby. Something like that. It's an Australian-based show. Right now they're in the Queensland area. And she's a retired nurse. Husband passed away a long time ago, and she's there trying to figure out what happened there. And he's a retired police officer and stuff like that. They're riding around. They're sitting on this, amazing, beautiful beach area, and just beautiful scene. And I told my wife, I said, it wasn't until I had met Ronald that I would not have known this. I said, you see how beautiful that is? I said, that's being shot probably in February. I said, it's beautiful summer. And it's opposite of us. We're cold, wet, and snowy, and I didn't ever think about that until we had that conversation here a while back. And you told me it was 100 degrees. And I said, 100 degrees in February?
Yeah.
And so we were sitting there talking. I said, looking at beautiful Queensland land and stuff they was driving through. I said, just think of that. That's January, February for them. So we kind of get our cultured TV watching. We watch a lot of Acorn and BritBox and our shows. It's kind of not a detective kind of show. It's really lighthearted. I don't even know if you call it a mystery. They run into things along the way, but it's really lighthearted. But we enjoy them. But yeah, we were sitting there talking about that just a few minutes ago. Said, yeah, Ronald's sitting over there right now. That's what it looks like where Ronald's at right now. And then we look outside and it's drab and nasty.
Yeah.
Anyhow, Ronald, anything in through the email?
No, nothing.
All righty.
Which is outreachnoah@gmail.com. If you have questions, comments, we're happy to correspond with you.
All righty. We're going to get started here. Genesis chapter 3, verse 16. Last week I said we're probably going to venture into 16, 17, all the way up, 18 and 19 stuff. No, after I got into looking at this week, tonight I'm just going to cover the one verse and some things, keep it a little short. And again, the reason why is because each of these passages kind of has their own story that I kind of want to stick with in a class instead of like doing one, starting it, but not finishing it. I just been kind of hanging out and, we're going to try to do 17 next week, God willing, and maybe 18, 19, because then it's going to shift again. The storyline's going to shift. So I'm just wanting to stay. So, because it's just so much, I don't want to give so much in one class on multiple type of subject areas. To me, I feel like it's better to stay. Okay, 16, we're going to talk about the woman, her conversation with the creator, what's going on after this initial event, with the serpent and all. But tonight I'm going to start out. I'm going to read you this passage, and this is generally the traditional way it's translated. I'm not going to read it exactly the way Rabbi Hirsch does it at first, because we're going to get into some. He changes the word for suffering to another word, and it kind of, I'm like, took me a little bit to get to see why he's doing it. But we're going to start out. I'm just going to read it for the way it's is traditionally read. Verse 16 of chapter 3 says, "But to the woman he had said, your suffering and that of your conception will I make it greater still. In suffering will you bear children. Your longing shall be for your husband, and he will rule over you." And so that word is generally translated suffering, sorrow, kind of thing. Most time it's suffering, like a pain and things like that. But Rabbi Hirsch uses a total different word there, and he goes and shows in the Hebrew that it's in a more appropriate translation. It reads weird for us that had grown up reading it, suffering and sorrows and things like that. But it took me a few minutes of just going over and going over, and then once I seen where he was going with the Hebrew on this, then it made it, it's one of those things that snaps. It makes a lot more sense than traditional English translation. But what I want to do is I want to start out discussing this passage from a portion of his collective writings. And then we're going to fall back into his Chumash. Kind of going to jump back and forth a little bit tonight. Ronald, can you hear me okay? I've been playing with position my mic tonight.
Yep, everything's fine. Am I
Alrighty.
okay too? Because I have the same issues.
Oh yeah, I got this. Yeah, I got this new mic, so I'm still learning it a little bit. And plus, I'm playing at my angle because now that I've got two screens, sometimes I want to jump over here and maybe read a passage or something from somewhere else. So, in his collective writings, Rabbi Hirsch says it is customary to interpret this biblical verse of Genesis 3:16 as a condemnation. In pain shall you bear your children. That's another word, English word, that this Hebrew word is translated into. In pain, you shall bear your children. But even a cursory examination of all the relevant scriptural passages should be sufficient to note that the three-letter root word for this Hebrew word that's translated as suffering, pain, is never used in Scripture to denote a physical pain. And if you're like me, and most of us has grown up with this passage, we know. And if you've been married and your wife's had children, been as lucky as I have, get to have a home birth and deliver your first born child, you would see that you would really feel like, okay, this is dealing with the pain of childbirth. But yet the word that is used in the Torah, its root word, Ein Tzadi Beit, Etzab, it really means to leave behind, to forsake, to let go, to relinquish. This verb of this passage has the connotation of a parting from, a leaving, something with reluctance. It would thus then be equivalent to renunciation. And it is this connotation that the Scripture uses most significantly to describe the newly decreed destiny, not only for the woman, but also the man. So therefore, his English his English translation of this passage goes, but to the woman he had said, your renunciation and that of your conception will I make greater still. In renunciation will you bear children. Your longing shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. That's weird to read that word in that passage. But as he's denoting, the Hebrew doesn't denote a physical pain. But that's something that's being renounced. And he goes a little further. I mean, he goes pretty even deep in his writings here. But right here in his Chumash, he goes on that the word, the word that's translated as suffering and sorrow is strictly mental and emotional anguish. Mental and emotional anguish. If suffering does occur in the sense of bodily pain, it refers to the effect of this pain on the mind and emotions. It goes on and says this word for suffering, etzavcha, stems from the root etzab that I read in his collective writings. From the root word etzab, and it means to leave something against one's will. A forceful withdrawal. A forceful withdrawal. In other words, a renouncing, a foregoing, a personal experience. And he goes, etzab, if he is forced to give up something he has wished to attain or to give up something he wished to keep. This same word, etzab, in 1 Kings 1:6. David had not trained his son yet to yield, had never asked him to refrain from anything. So the Torah speaks in the language of men, so God felt that he would have to detach himself from man to renounce him, which is the word etzab here in 1 Kings. He said, God had already said to Adam, through sufferings you shall eat. Again, we have the word with the root etzab in it. This pronouncement assigned man a new state of being, which would last for a very long time. Formerly, man had known no renunciation. None of the world's creatures except man knows this anguish. No other creature makes demands that cannot be fulfilled. Not so man. Once he had sinned, nature no longer accords with his wishes. And he must now struggle with nature for everything. Only by renunciation can he attain anything. Only by giving up one good thing, one form of happiness, can he attain another. He goes on, he says, let us note that now this right here is really good. He switches subjects, right? Not subjects, but there's another way this word for suffering is used. It's sabim. And this kind of caught me off guard as I was studying, but it's really interesting. He says, let us note that the term for gods, little G-O-D-S, gods, etzabim, is derived from this root because of the suffering, and hence imagined himself to be surrounded by hostile powers that decrees upon him a life of renunciation and takes pleasure in hardships. These powers are therefore called atzavim, or the same root word for suffering. They're atzavim Elohim. They decree upon man, and they say no to all his desires. Also to woman, he's already said, your renunciation and that of your conception, I will make it greater still. The sentencing of the woman does not begin with, he says that in Hebrew, doesn't begin with it. It shows that her sentencing was merely a connotation of the man's sentencing, showing that they're connected together because of this word atzabim, the word suffering, which is decreed upon them. And I'm trying to, I know I had one right here in one of the Psalms. I believe it was the Psalms. Yeah, Psalm 16, when it talks about right here about it being a false god that causes suffering, the hostile powers. And that's one of the things when I'm studying, like I found, my Scottish heritage of the Celtics and the things that they believe in the nature, that all the natures and even with the Romans and the Greeks, all aspects of nature was a separate God. And all these gods demanded things, or they caused things upon man. And so I started seeing what it was talking about here, about the man. This suffering was decreed upon man because of his sin. But as time went, Rabbi Hirsch says, man forgot the cause of the suffering. He forgot the cause. He forgot the sin that caused this suffering. And therefore, he recognized the foreign powers around him to be the cause. And so it's interesting. Rabbi Hirsch, in his collective writings, brought up Psalms chapter 16. Psalms chapter 16, verse 4. Because this word for suffering is mentioned here by King David. Psalms 4, but the sufferings of those who ally themselves to another, who allies themselves to another, only multiply. I would not pour their drink. It says, I would not pour their drink offerings, even less than blood, and would not even take their names upon my lips. But when it's talking about here, but the sufferings of those who ally themselves to another, it's talking about to another false god, false deity. Rabbi Hirsch goes on here and shows that again, this root word atzab is mentioned in this verse, chapter 4. It says, is the pain of renunciation. And he says again, see the commentary that he has in 3:16. It says, is to seek most intimate union, marital alliance with another person. The pure relationship between God and man is illustrated in its most intensity by the tie of marriage. Therefore, we have here those who seek an alliance with another God. Because with these words, David firmly renounces the error described in verses 2 and 3 of Psalms. The pain of renunciation is all the greater for those who would seek their earthly happiness by contracting an alliance with a force other than the one God. And that's the reason why Rabbi Hirsch is bringing this up in Genesis chapter 3:16, because this pain and suffering that people suffer by serving a false god, and they see things happening, well, the sun, the drought came in and destroyed all the plants, and the sun god, it was angry, or Poseidon was angry in the sea and it cast the waves against the ships. And so they forgot where these sufferings come from. They forgot the sin that brought all of these sufferings, and therefore then they started giving these sufferings, different sufferings, to different gods that they had created. And King David is saying here, man had contracted basically an alliance with a force other than the one God. They who hoped that all their desires would be fulfilled if only they attached themselves to such an earthly power, shall instead feel pain of renunciation and all their bitterness. So they have this suffering that's going on because of this false deity. It's this asab. And so they the Hebrew word asab and renunciation, of these, the false gods and these deities, these things these people are having to give up to serve these gods, therefore is also related to Genesis chapter 3:16, the sufferings between the man and the woman, the different sufferings God said they would have to go through. But he says, but he, Rabbi Hirsch talking about King David here, says, but he who places himself under the rule of God in all his active life, and who entrusts his fate to him, shall not experience. And if we look at Asab as a noun, strong feelings, embarrassment, or as a verb, because Asab can be a verb or a noun, that they would not experience the cause or the feelings of shame. He knows that no asab, no suffering, since he understands all of his joys and sorrows are sent to him only by the one above, and from those, he says, and for the purpose of training him. Now, I find that really interesting because this whole issue that we've talked about, like last week, that this sin took man and put him on a new stage of having to be trained in purification, trials, and character development that Rabbi Hirsch brought out. All of this happened as man was being pushed out of paradise. He was being pushed into a different stage. And like what Rabbi Hirsch said earlier, he said that this word also describes a new destiny on man. It's a new destiny that wasn't there before. He goes on about verse 4 in 16:4 of Psalms. He says, to him everything that life will bring is a blessing. He feels that even the most grievous sorrow will serve in the end to enrich his life, which is dedicated to God. We will feel the bitter pain only if we believe that our woe and welfare and the fulfillment of our wants are dependent upon another. How many of us, we depend on our jobs, we depend on this, we depend on that, and so when something happens there, our faith and our trust in God just goes awry. And that's one thing I love about the Hasidim, especially the Breslov. They really talk a lot about knowing God, that He is your source for everything, and everything that happens to us is for our betterment. And so, Rabbi Hirsch is showing this connotation here with this, what we always considered a condemnation. Right here, a condemnation, where it's, where he says that, in childbirth, you're going to suffer. Go back over here, 16. He goes on, he said that your suffering or your renunciation, in your childbirth, your conception, and bearing your children, And yet, when we look at the Hebrew of this particular word, it means, it's been translated suffering, and suffering, is, the woe is me. It's interesting that in the Hebrew, in the Orthodox Hasidic teachings of the Hebrew shows that these things that he's going to be telling man and telling woman about the issue of their sin in their relationship with God, these are times of training and testing, that these are actually good for them. In the long run, these things are good for them. Just like, speak to, any woman who's given birth, it's like, I've heard women say, it's like after the child is born and laid upon their breast, it's like the pain they went through is almost like immediately, they don't remember it sometimes. I mean, they'll have a memory of it, but it's just like it was there, it was gone. But then this blessing is laid at their, laid upon them, this new child. And therefore, a lot of what they struggled with becomes just a memory. And that's what he's talking about. He says, if we just won't put our dependency on another force, we renounce that other force, which we're seeing here in this story is representing the serpent, was that other source, was that other power that they were listening to. But he goes on and he says, the welfare and the fulfillment of our wants are dependent upon another. He's talking about if we don't believe in those, our woes and our wares. He says, and the powers remote from our own moral way and subordinate to the blind force of nature, which pays no heed to our thoughts and aspirations as a human being. Only the thought that we were indeed so important before cold and blind natural powers could cause us to feel so miserable and inadequate and devoid of the ability to strive the fulfillment of our fondest hopes. So we're saying that when we get down in these ways and we allow these sufferings to take us over, and it takes us actually away from our faith in God. And so we have to renounce the direction that these emotions and even the senses we have upon our body, the pain, once we start renouncing that and start understanding that all of this is through the will of God, then it becomes a blessing. It's sometimes not immediately in our eyesight. When I was going through the pain I was going through before I knew I had even a gallbladder issue, I didn't even have symptoms of a gallbladder issue. I had other things. But through everything I went through, the Creator taught me through that suffering. And it's really interesting that there are places where God says you'll bear your sin. You do this, you do that, you will bear your sin. And when I was going through that tremendous pain that I was going through, it was like somewhere in the middle of that, I began to thank the Creator for the suffering I was going through, because it's kind of hard to explain that you will bear your sin. There's a blessing in that. Not that I say go out and do something that you're going to have to be in deep trouble with Daddy with. But if something happens and you do have to go through that in the middle of all of that, it made me closer to God instead of further away. And so I can see what Rabbi Hirsch is talking about here about the word renunciation instead of the word suffering. because even in this is part of the woman's trial and training to draw her in a closer walk with the Creator, and not a punishment, not a condemnation. Because he said it's always translated as a condemnation, and he's been showing that it's not really a condemnation. It's something that God put on woman, and then man has his own thing that he put on, that we're going to get in verse 17, that he puts on man. But then again, it's not like, a lash across the back when you start looking at this Hebrew, because he said that nowhere in the scripture that this word is translated as pain, physical pain. It's a renunciation of something that you've got to go through to renounce so that you can draw closer to the Creator. So back over to his hum. Ronald, anything there before I continue on? Okay. Am I making any sense of this? Because there's a lot. This little verse can be, and that's the reason why I didn't want to get over into man's conversation yet, because there's just so much here in this little bit. He goes on. Rabbi Hirsch goes on. He says, from the viewpoint of God's concern for the education of mankind. And that's one thing I've learned a lot with Rabbi Hirsch. He brings out, there's so much that's behind the English that we don't see when we get into the original language. That God is very concerned about our education in morals and ethics. He's very concerned about it. And therefore, some things that's translated in a way, and we look, oh, he's condemning, and he's being the mean ogre. We did bad, and Daddy's mad, and hey, that's a rhyme. We did bad, and Daddy's mad. We get this false impression of the passage, when truly behind it in the original language, we have a Creator that is concerned about that which he created. He's concerned. He wants us to be educated. He says, from the viewpoint of God's concern for educating the education of mankind, the enmity that exists between man and the serpent means this. Nope. That man was led astray by the shrewdness of an animal must never remain a mindful vast gulf that the serpent that separates man from animal. He's talking about the education of man. He's so concerned with. And so we see here in Genesis 3:16 that even in the Hebrew word for suffering, there is a concern of education for man in his well-being. He goes on and says, the woman is generally exempt from the suffering decree upon man. The suffering decree that was upon man, the male Adam, the woman is not. The woman is exempted from that one. We're going to see the working of the sweat of the vow. She is exempt from the decree that was decreed upon man. She need not gain her bread by the sweat of her brow. Nevertheless, her renunciation is greater. The whole life of a woman, from her earliest girlhood, is a life of renunciation and sacrifice. It's a life of renunciation and sacrifice for others. She's always doing for someone else. Adding to this, the woman offers her whole existence and contributes of her own flesh and blood on behalf of the tender young growing in her womb. Adding further to this, there is no greater joy for a woman than the joy she takes in her children. But this is the highest joy that can be attained only at the cost of supreme sacrifice. There's a lot a woman has to renunciate. She has to give up in having children. And a lot of that sacrifice that she has to go through is actually the seeds of the joy that she has in life, the joy of her children. You know, especially you talk to women as their children are older. Again, the birthing process itself, what we would consider the suffering, is even more fainter as the relationship between mother and child grows. And it makes sense. Or why wouldn't a woman, there are women that have 10, 12 children, especially back in the old days when they lived on farms. She was giving birth to farmhands. You know, I mean, if that's people who lived on farms had larger families back then. Now, with the average 1 and 2, 2 children. And it's even those that can't have natural childbirth, like my daughter, our grandchild, our first, we don't have a second one yet, but our first grandchild, they had to go through IVF. We didn't know that. They were going through the pain, financial and the pain. Because we've got pictures of little Clara laying there on a blanket in this little bitty onesie that says, I used to be frozen. And it has all the needles around her that took her to bring her into life. And though that wasn't the natural way, and they couldn't figure out because my wife was healthy, my son-in-law was healthy. They went to the doctor. We didn't know they went on this they were going through this for 10 years, and we didn't know this. They kept it secret. But it turned out prior to them in the midst of them doing their first, we didn't know that they already went through the IVF once and it didn't do. But then we found out that she found out she changed woman doctors, and this one woman doctor, she was a little more thorough, and she just reached and grabbed a hold of my daughter's neck and started feeling around. And she found these knots in her throat, and turned out she, at 30, or in her early 30s, she had thyroid cancer on one of her thyroids. And they said, but that's the reason why you couldn't have children, because it was messing with the hormones in her body. So she had to have that one side removed. The other side has some nodules on it, but they're not cancerous. They keep a watch on it every 6 months. But yet, of all the pain that she went through to have a child through IVF, we were up there Saturday. We about once a month we go up and spend a day with my daughter and son-in-law and grandbaby. So we had a family get together up there Saturday. And before we left, my daughter, she says, we still have some more embryos. She's going to be 39 this year. And she goes, here pretty soon, we're going to consult about what they do, call a transfer. She goes, we want to have another child. Knowing how much it costs, how much pain, how many shots. We did not know that when they'd come and visit us, they would leave early, because on the way home, my son-in-law was having to give her shots all the time. He administered all the shots. I mean, there was like a ton of needles all the way around my grandbaby on that pictures they made. And because she kept them all. But they're willing to go through the suffering, what we would consider suffering, to have another child, even though it's not natural. But yet, here in the Hebrew, that suffering is not a suffering of pain. We're shown here it's a suffering of education, because there's a concerned God that's concerned about us. There's a renouncing of things that's going on And what we thought was a condemnation that a woman was going to have to go through in childbirth turns out to not be a condemnation, but it's a lesson in bring a person closer to God. And they are. I say my daughter and son-in-law, are, a lot closer than where they were, before all that happened. But it's through this sacrifice that the woman goes through becomes the highest aspect of her joy. She doesn't have to go through what man has got to go through the working and the sweating. Hers is actually, as Rabbi Hirsch says, it's greater, because the woman has to offer her whole existence, contributes her own flesh and blood on the behalf of a tender young life. There is a great sacrifice for a woman. But yet this is, through the word etzav, it is to show us it's not a condemnation, but it's an area of training and drawing close to God. Now he goes on at the end of the passage. He says, "And you to your husband will be your desire." He goes on, he says, "Thus, this is the direction of the feeling toward a certain objective. In other words, a striving and a longing." This Hebrew word here for that's translating the desire is a striving and a longing. And what's going to be interesting is we're going to, I believe it's this same word that is used when we get to Genesis chapter 4:7. I think this is the word that's used in that passage, and then it's used in the Song of Solomon, where the woman's desire is toward her husband, and he gets even deeper into this aspect, because it's this word is used when it talks about in Genesis 4:7 there, where sin's desire is for you. And he's going to bring a lot better teaching out. When we get to Genesis 4:7, you're going to learn something about that passage you've never known. Because, again, this word desire is a striving and a longing, and it has a reason why it's doing that. And it's not sinful, because of the striving and longing is not negative. It's a positive. But he goes on here in closing up this passage, says, "It is in the nature of a woman to feel that she can fulfill her life's purpose only when she is joined to her husband. Yet he will impose upon her a new renunciation. When the relationship between man and earth changed, and man could eat bread only by the sweat of his countenance, the woman became dependent on her husband to be the primary breadwinner. The original equality between man and woman was shattered." Remember, we talked about this equality at the creation of Eve with Adam. Well, it becomes shattered. That equality became shattered at this event. This is the general tendency. I highlighted this. I highlighted this one in green, because anytime I highlight in green, green means life. For me, when I see something green, that passage is saying something about life. Rabbi Hirsch says, "Only the Torah will bring redemption and spread the canopy of peace. Man and woman will return to their priestly calling and serve God as equals. Woman will again become the crown of her husband and the pearl of his life." That is in Proverbs 12:4. When the Torah enters a marriage, when the Torah enters the marriage, this is one of the beautiful aspects of accepting the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. because it's Torah. It's Torah for the nations. Israel has their Torah, the Torah of Sinai. We have the Torah of the nations, the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, the 6 commands that came down from Adam through Noah, and the seventh one that was added after the flood. That's within our covenant with God. When a husband and wife accepts the Torah, it brings redemption and spreads canopy of peace upon the marriage. The woman will return, the man and woman will return back to their priestly calling and serve God as equals. And the woman becomes the crown of her husband, the pearl of his life, because now they're in the Torah of Hashem, living according to the will of Hashem. And when we live according to the will of Hashem, these things that were once removed from us are now being brought back through the power of the Torah, the observance of his commandments. And it does the same thing. I know we're talking about man and woman, like, because we're talking about the first man and woman, but it's talking about marriage and man and woman. But this doesn't mean that if you never get married, or if you're a widower, or if you're divorced, it doesn't mean you're single. You take the Torah upon yourself, it brings redemption and spreads the canopy of peace upon your life. And I love how Rabbi Hirsch just brings that out. Only through the Torah will bring redemption and the spread of the canopy. Through the Torah, he says, God's instructions, not the physical written words. The Torah is the instructions of Hashem, instructions of the Creator. Through the instructions of the Creator, those instructions will bring redemption and spread the pain. Read Ezekiel chapter 18. Find what he says. Matter of fact, if you don't mind, I'll get it real quick. I'm gonna prove what Rabbi Hirsch is saying here through the words of the Creator to the prophet. Verse 1 of chapter 18, Ezekiel 18, the words of Hashem came to me saying. So these are the words of God. If a man is righteous and practices righteous and just, it says, if a man is righteous and practices justice and righteousness, and he does not partake in idols, and he keeps going on. And when he's talking about the ones who observes his commandments, he says, and going according to, if the man goes according to my decrees and observe my ordinances, to practice truth, he is a righteous man, and he shall surely live. There's redemption, there's peace right there. But I love right here when it gets on into verses 20. It says 21. I'm going to go down here to 21 to show you what Rabbi Hirsch is saying here. As for the wicked man, if he repents of all of his sins that he has committed, and observes all my decrees. And for us, that's the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. That's the decrees that's been decreed upon us, all humanity. And practices justice and righteousness. He shall surely live and not die. All of his transgressions that he committed will not be remembered against him. He shall live because of the righteousness that he did. See, righteousness is an act. So when we think about that, he says, a wicked man, in verse 20 says, if a wicked man turns away from his wickedness that he did and performs justice and righteousness, he will cause his soul to live. These are words of God to the prophet. And for us of the nations, that is observing the decree upon the nations of the Sheva Mitzvahs. The Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, which is no idolatry, no blasphemy, no murder, no theft, no forbidden sexual relations, not eating meat taken from eaten from a living animal while it's still alive, and setting up courts of justice based on these. And so we can see here through the instructions, as Rabbi Hirsch says, only through the instructions of God will bring redemption and spread the canopy of peace, and man and woman will return to the equal priestly calling. If you have a godly couple, then they're serving God together in the will of God, in his commandments upon their own lives. Then the woman becomes the crown of her husband and the pearl of his life. And I have to say that for my wife. I'm the blessed one. She's an amazing woman. And I personally feel like she's brought more blessing in our marriage and in our life and with our kids than I have. She's a very godly woman. And he ends it like this. So it says where it says, "And your desire shall be for your husband." The desire is not wrong. It's a longing to be with your husband. We're like, so we'll get more into that. We'll get into Song of Solomon, where it says that, that the woman is, her desire is for her husband. And in this word desire that's mentioned here has a whole lot of deeper meaning. And it's used in places in the Torah that we wouldn't thought it would be used, where in English it sounds negative, but in Hebrew it's a positive. And again, so this passage is a positive. It's not a condemnation upon woman. It's not a condemnation upon her. And let me go back over here to, to finish up. I was going to read this one more section out of his collective writings. He says here, he goes on, he talks about this renunciation that man has and the renunciation that the woman has. He says, this is an element of training that will henceforth be distinguishing feature of man's mental and moral work upon himself. Paradise on earth was lost through greed. There's another whole story behind. We go look at what the words of about the woman's looking at the tree and all the desire and everything that it talks about is through greed. It says only through the renunciation can it be regained. The paradise on earth will be opened only to those who have learned to renounce it and are capable of renouncing it. And we're talking about the negative things, the negative traits. And we're going to see that here in this next passage that I want to kind of close on. Is because again, what did the serpent open up when they eat? The reason why the Creator did not want man to eat of that fruit, and Rabbi Hirsch shows us. He shows us through the Hebrew about the aesthetic beauty of the tree. The aesthetic beauty is beauty and ugliness is what the good and evil really stood for, and we went through that in a couple of classes ago. God did not want the pleasure impulse to rule our lives, to be so caught up on beauty and the beauty of things and all that we could describe of beauty, and all the different feelings that's ascribed to this impulse, this pleasure impulse. So Rabbi Hirsch goes on to renounce the gratification of sensual impulses and cherish desires for the sake of the higher purpose, to perform one's duty in a spirit of renunciation, to find one's happiness in so doing. That is the task through which human beings are henceforth to mature into men and women, and through which both man and woman are to preserve and demonstrate the divine qualities inherent within them. The gates of paradise will be locked to them in order that they may go through this training course. You will have to do without many things in order to earn just the bare bread of your existence. So he's talking about the man because he's combining 16 and 17 in this passage. I find this very interesting that Rabbi Hirsch talks about the renouncement of gratification of the sensual impulses and some cherished desires for the sake of a higher purpose. To perform duties in the spirit of renunciation, to find one's happiness in so doing. I find that interesting because I'm going to admit it. I've been on a new journey in my own life, and it's a journey of self mastery and learning to control things. There are some great wise people that have lived on this planet. And I'll be honest with you, I've been studying some of the wisdom of the ancient Stoics, especially Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of Rome. He was an amazing man. I mean, here he was emperor, and yet he learned how to control the negative traits that we're talking about here. And I'm learning a lot about this controlling impulses, impressions. Matter of fact, my daily meditation today was a passage from Epictetus talking about not letting your impressions kidnap you. Like when something happens, one of the great things that Marcus Aurelius carried a coin in his cloak that said pause and reflect, and had the Roman alphabet around it. And when something happened that he wanted to react, just how it is, somebody says something, somebody does something, says something about you, and you just blurt. And I've been a person of reaction and not a person of responding. That he would pause and take his thumb and go through every letter of the alphabet before he would respond, because that would give him the time to cool down and not react in a negative point. He was able to be able to poise himself and respond in a more positive, more controlling of his mind, instead of letting the emotions enslave him. He enslaved his emotions, not for the negative, but for the positive, to be able to be a positive, aspect in his life. And here we have Rabbi Hirsch is saying the same thing about renouncing. And that's really what I've been learning, is this renouncing of the negative impulses, of letting them control you. And this morning when I was going over this and I was looking at this again, I'm like, this is everything that I've been learning about, self-mastery. It's a philosophy a philosophy to direct my own behavior. And now, not to be in judgment, as I've been working on myself and I've been reading and learning from the masters of wisdom. Now when I'm seeing things going on at work, I'm like, wow, have I not done that same thing many times over? Like this one particular coworker today was so upset. That person was throwing the tape gun around, throwing papers around, stomping off. And I'm going, wow, totally enslaved to the emotion. And I'm like, that's who I am. That's who I was. I'm not going to say who I was completely, because I'm still learning to control, because it's still things happen. That person cuts you off on the road, and you're shouting and all that. And this one person that I'm learning from, Ryan Holiday out of Texas, he lives, driving around in Austin. And he says, what good does that do? He said, the person can't hear you. All you've done is riled your emotions up, your heart rate's up, your insulin's up. You're the one that's not doing well out of this situation. That other person's done gone, talking about not shouting at other drivers. And so my wife and I, we now joke about this, because if you drive on 153 in Chattanooga, you get to learn a lot of patience with other people. But here we see here that this passage has a lot to do. And when we get into verse 17, we're going to see a lot. These things have a lot to do to teach us to control ourselves. and to renounce these sensual impulses that has a tendency to enslave us and to cause us to react wrong, to make a bad decision. And we see here with the woman, this renouncing that she has to go through turns out to be a positive toward her creator, because it brings about a joy, one of the greatest joys. And here the woman sacrifices everything in her life. Like it says, blood, sweat, tears, everything that this woman has to go through for someone else. And it turns out to be her greatest joy. Her child is her greatest joy, but yet she has to give up so much of herself. It's interesting, isn't it? All right, Ronald.
Okay, yeah, I have a couple of things I'd like to bring up. One associated and one not quite associated. So, at the end of the verse, it states, and he will rule over you, in stating the husband's going to rule over the wife. Now, this has played a big role in history. It's actually been used to oppress women. Can you unpack the Hebrew, how it is in the Hebrew, what that's actually stating as? Because in the English it's quite blunt, and it's created a
You
controlling
know what's
effect on the
interesting?
male side of life.
Hold on, let me grab my. He focuses mainly in his Chumash on this one, on the desire aspect. Let me look over here just because I didn't read everything in his complete. See if he talks about the word rule here real quick. There's a little bit more. Let me look at the word, Hebrew word that's translated word rule there. Verse 16. Where am I at here? 16. Shall be your craving. I don't think he discussed that word. Let me look at this. Oh, move my bookmark. Okay, here we go. In his Chumash, he doesn't actually cover the word rule on that. He just covers the word desire. So now let me see if in his right here. He has a little bit more information here in his collective writings. That's the reason why I bought those, because you run into this a lot. He'll actually have a footnote to go over to his collective writings. It says God, is saying to the woman, that you are going to long for him and he's going to rule over you. So your longing shall be for your husband and he will rule over you. Then again, he's talking about the word longing. Right now, the root word that's translated as longing or desire means leg. It also has a meaning of something about a marketplace to which all men direct their steps, to which all roads leads. He has a connotation of a strong movement toward an object of attraction. It says your entire being and all your aspirations will be directed toward your husband. And that's what he's talking about. The root word has the meaning of a leg, a marketplace where people are attracted to go to. It's used in that way as well. So he's saying that a woman says your entire being and all your aspirations will be directed toward your husband. You'll do everything in your power to win his love and approval and to make him happy. You will allow him to rule over you. You will submit to his will and allow him to guide you. Now, again, that's a very important thing right here. A proper righteous husband is not going to put his wife under his thumb. He's going to guide her.
And that's
The
where the
word
problem
rule,
lies, because man has put his wife under the thumb and been quite oppressive over time. And,
yeah, and yeah,
looks at it as an ownership and
not a
and
guiding. Again, not as
yeah,
a partner.
that's right. That's the word I'm just trying to think of.
That I told my wife the other day that as I've gotten older, we'll be this May 39 years married. I told her that as reference to her as my wife has become less attractive. But what I really see my wife as, more than wife, but as a partner. And to me, I told her, for me, in my mind and my mentality, the partner aspect of my wife has a stronger relationship meaning than husband wife. Does that? I don't know if that makes sense to anyone. Because when you're partners with someone, you're invested. You've got an investment in one another. There's an investment going on there. Where to me, wife doesn't denote necessarily, to me, I mean, again, this is my own mental thinking. Wife to me denotes the female person in my life. But partner describes who my wife is. Does that make sense? And so he's saying here, you will submit to his will and allow him to guide you. And if you are a proper God loving husband, then you're not going to want to put her under your thumb. Would you want God to put his thumb over you and just mash you in the ground and make you subservient? No. Again, we're talking about our Creator has a desire for our training. He's concerned about our training. And as a husband, should be concerned with the guidance and training of his wife. He goes on, this surrender on the part of the wife to her husband is a basic prerequisite for the unity of the husband and wife. The husband cannot be the one to submit to his wife, because the husband is in his portion is the one who is the upholder of the divine and the human traditions which are put into practice in the home through the institution of marriage, and to which both the husband and wife together should dedicate their entire energies. So we see here this ruling is a woman submitting to the guidance of her husband. He's bringing in the divine, bringing in the traditions, and therefore he's training her and guiding her in the ways of the family. He goes on, he says, the very first commandment from God not to eat from the Eitz Hara, the tree of evil, was addressed to the man, through him also to the woman. Therefore, Adam should not have disobeyed God's commandment for the sake of Eve. Rather, Eve should have subordinated her own desires to the will of God as commanded to her through Adam. Again, Adam should have properly guided her. So too, the husband has henceforth act as a spokesman for the vocation decreed by God for all human beings, and he shall see to it that these God ordained tasks should be discharged also in his own marriage and in his own home. The subordinate role of the wife to her husband became more evident after nature's relationship toward man changed, and in resulting reliance on man's labor for the maintenance of the home and the family. And so, yeah, the man has abused. Again, the English, you shall rule. Somebody wants to jump to tyranny and dictatorship instead of a proper form of ruling. And I mean, especially like if you study with the rabbis and you learn the relationship between a rabbi and a student. And if a rabbi is not a student to his students, then he's not a proper rabbi. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so that's the same way with the husband and wife. The husband is to guide her. The ruling is the guiding, making sure that he's bringing in the instructions of God and transmitting them properly to the wife so she can observe them properly. I mean, it happens happens all the time. We're all still learning. And even with my wife, we'll be discussing or something's going on. And I say, well, this is how, this commandment works right here. And this is how we should be doing this. She said, why can't we? And I said, no, this is how the commandment works. And this is how we should be doing this. Okay. And that's the way it's supposed to work. It's no, you got ego, you got egotistical men. Well, let me just put it this way. I have a new term for this stuff when I see it all the time. I even see it at work with there's a couple of guys who are managers, rednecks with power. And that's the way some marriages are. They're rednecks with power. When got their ball cap on backwards and their Bud Light in their hands, and they think they own the world. That's is my Southern way of looking at some people. We got a couple of these managers that work, and he's just a glorified redneck, And he goes, well, what do you mean? I said, just watch the actions. I said, that's not a proper way something can be done. And I'm not putting it down. I'm just, calling it the way it is. But that's the way a lot of husbands are. They're a redneck with power. They got them a woman, and they think that I'm the king. I'm the king of the kingdom, and they're my slave now. No, that's not what it means to rule over her. That actually degrades the way a lot of religious Western. I'm going to put it this way: a lot of Western religious men who control their wives. They're dictators, and they don't represent the image of God in them, and they are tearing down the image of God in their wife.
Yeah, by idolizing themselves as the power base.
If a man wants to properly rule his wife, he will illuminate the image of God that's in her.
Did you see Veronica's question? Is that both the Jews and Amalekites?
Hold on. I'm not seeing it in my... Nope, I'm not seeing any. I've got my chat room up, but it's not. It's not. Let me go out of the chat. There it is. I had to go out of chat and come back in. Is this both for Jews and all? Are you talking about illuminating the wife, Veronica?
Yes.
Yeah, this is for humanity. This was before Sinai. This was just right at the time of right before the banishment of the Garden of Eden. They hadn't even been banished yet. That's coming up. I don't think we went to the part where they were banished yet. But no, that's the reason why I love Genesis. This is before it all happened. And just my personal opinion, the basic, for us as Noahides, the basic plain teachings of passages and understandings is for us. There's probably some deep Kabbalistic stuff there that's that's not for us. That's for the, the super wise rabbis that knows that, the it's inside the Hebrew language that we don't know. But this is when we look at the Hebrew, not the translation, we can see that there is a lot more that the English is hiding. It's not hiding it on purpose. It's a translation. And I love it. I love, it's a TV show. I was watching Star Trek Discovery a few years ago, and it had young Spock on there, and he was battling with his human sister, and they were back and forth, and she yells, she goes, "But I know Vulcan," and he looks right there, and I wrote this down in my book of quotes. I got a book, I write quotes down when stuff happens. And he said, "The essence of translation is not understanding." Something like that. I have to find my book, but it's there. Just because you have a translation and you think you understand a language through translation, you don't. It's like, speaking of quotes, this one's from I heard this one this morning from Senator John Kennedy. Violence undermines morality. He said that. I thought, wow, I had to write that down. Violence undermines morality. But no, this is Genesis. No, I come home to God through this book. Well, actually, Ezekiel 18 set me free from idolatry. But my walk with God, I have learned to walk with him through Genesis, especially chapters 1 and 9. My walk with God has been in Genesis. I told my wife, I said, for Genesis for me was a coming home. It was a coming home. It's a coming home for me. Or homecoming, however you want to put it. Because the more I study in, these individual verses, and I get to look in, the way, like I said, I love Rabbi Hirsch. He didn't break down rule in here, but he does cover it a little bit more in his collective writings. But I've been set free in so many ways, like the laws of kind and species. Once I understood that out of Genesis chapter 1, 11 and 12. Years I've read about the grain coming up, but I never saw the law of species there, the way he brought it out. Just different aspects. And I'm hoping this is helping some of y'all out there, and you start learning about the true role of a man, the true role of a woman. Though we're this side of the garden, we can start walking back toward the garden as we observe God's will. I really do believe that. We may not reach the garden completely, but we can be on the path back to the garden as we turn our lives back toward God and morals and ethics according to God's will. And that is even like here, ruling the woman should be guiding her and lifting up and enlightening the image of God within her. And you don't, let's say you say you're not married. And I'm not saying you have to be in a marital relationship to lift up the image of God in another person. So think about that. Think about how society would be as men and women and the different races if we could recognize that the image of God is in every human being. And the way we treat that person, we can illuminate that image instead of ruling over a person or having a superiority complex over a certain person or a certain race. Instead, illuminate the image of God that's in those people. And it will set them free and it will bring them up. And so that's the same way with the husband and wife. We start at home and we go out into the community and into the world.
And the other thing is, which is quite off target, is a lot of people might think it odd that you are looking outside Torah for wisdom from Marcus Aurelius and others. You give a brief explanation on
the Torah doesn't
validate.
But
Okay. Okay.
There is a statement in the Talmud when he was talking about, actually, Andy brought this up the other day, and I may misquote this because I can't remember exactly how Andy said it. But in the Talmud, the Jewish writings, when they are talking among themselves, they said that, the wisdom of the nations they could learn, but the Torah, or the instructions of the nations, especially toward God, they are not permitted to learn. God grants wisdom to all humanity. Matter of fact, the Torah even says, "Learn from every man." That is a statement from one of the rabbis, is to learn from other man. Okay, Marcus Aurelius. Okay, Stoicism actually came out of Greece. Is there idolatry in there? Yes. I don't go there. It's just like when I first became walking in the 7 laws, there was not a lot of material out there. And my rabbis and my teachers told me, you're going to have to read Jewish material to understand some of this, but there's stuff in there that's not for you. Just what you can gain from, as a non-Jewish person, gain from it. But stuff that's for Israel, just leave it alone. And I do the same thing. I actually was talking to a friend of mine who has been in this path a lot longer than me, a whole lot more educated. He's a very intellectual person, has multiple degrees, and he's very well studied. And so actually, before I started this, I was consulting him and was sharing him what I was doing for. And I said, I'm following the advice of the rabbis when I was learning the Noahide laws, reading Jewish material that wasn't written. I wasn't the audience of that material. And so I'm doing the same thing with that. It's like right here. This is the basic statement. Stoicism is a personal philosophy to direct my behavior. It's all on behavior. And what's interesting is that it started in Greece. Greece is well known that the Greeks were descendants. They were idolaters and stuff, but they were descendants of Japheth. The blessing that was put upon Japheth, that his tents would spread, it would grow. The rabbis, if you go and search their teachings on the blessing of Japheth, that their tents would expand, was talking about their wisdom, their knowledge, their intellect. And the rabbis will admit that through Japheth, the world has gained a ton of knowledge of mathematics, the arts, the sciences, the things the Jews don't study about, even though they do study more now, but they study the Torah because that's what they're told to do. But the Greeks is a descendants of Japheth, and the wisdoms and the knowledges they have comes from that blessing from Noah. And the rabbis even talk about that. But Marcus Aurelius I found out, it was interesting. I've been really praying about this. And it was so interesting, guys, that even Thursday and Friday of this last week, I've been talking to Hashem about this. And when I do my meditations in the mornings, I got a daily meditation book that's got quotes from the different wise men. This is put out by Ryan Holiday. It's just a daily meditation. Today's meditation is an example. Was prepare for the storm. This is the true athlete, a person who is rigorously training against false impressions. Remain firm, you who suffer. Don't be kidnapped by your impressions. That was by Epictetus. And Ryan's comment on this, it says, if we don't have a plan, we will never learn how to put up storm windows. That spoke to me. We will be at the mercy of these external and internal elements as a storm. And I said, and I wrote in my journal today, when I do this, I talk to Hashem. When I'm reading this wisdom, I talk to Hashem about it. And this last Thursday or Friday, I was in prayer about about what I'm learning, because I am concerned, you know, and I told him I should kick out the stuff when it mentioned gods. I'm not worried about that. I'm learning how to control my thoughts, my actions. It was so interesting that on Saturday morning before I left, I jumped on real quick to check my Facebook, and there was an article on there from aish.com that I follow. Aish.com is a Jewish website. And like I said, I've been praying about this. And right here in my thread, I've printed it off and read it to my wife as we went up to go see our granddaughter. Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius and the Jews. And I'm like, you're kidding me. I just was talking to God about this. Come to find out, let me tell you how close he was to the Jews. And those of you who have studied Jewish sources have heard of Rabbi Nasi Yehuda. Well, Rabbi Nasi Yehuda and Marcus Aurelius knew each other since they were infants. Because at the time, the emperor of Rome, when Marcus Aurelius was an infant, let me find this right here. It was so cool. Right here, I want to read. Can I take a few minutes and read this? A few seconds.
Go right ahead.
He says the full name Marcus Aurelius. His full name was Marcus Aurelius Antonius, and Jewish tradition identifies him as the benevolent Roman ruler, Antonius, mentioned in the Talmud. It says, according to the tradition, the future emperor Antonius developed a deep affection for the Jewish people as an infant, following an extraordinary episode involving his mother, Marcus's mother, and the mother of a great Jewish rabbi, Shimon ben Gamliel II. At the time, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and his wife had a newborn son, Yehuda, whom they circumcised in defiance of the Roman Empire's harsh decree restricting Jewish life. They were summoned before the Roman authorities, and the couple traveled to Rome with their baby. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was renowned for his wisdom and kindness among the Jews and the Gentiles alike. And along the journey, many people offered assistance, including Antonius's mother, Marcus's mother. In a daring act, she exchanged her own infant with Yehuda. When Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and his wife presented the baby Antonios before the Roman judges, the authorities were astonished. The child was not circumcised. The couple was released, and on their return journey to the newborns, on their return journey, the newborns were switched back, and at that moment, the two mothers pledged their sons would remain lifelong friends. So Yehuda the Nasi, the leader of Israel, and Marcus Aurelius's mothers. Marcus's mother saved the life and the life of the child from the Romans by letting them offer her child up as theirs. And from that point on, Antonius later became emperor of Rome, succeeding his uncle in the year 161. Yehuda, meanwhile, now Rabbi Yehuda, known simply as Rabbi, because of his greatness, succeeded his father as Nasi, or leader of the Jewish people in the land of Israel, in 163 CE. As distinguished leaders of the respective worlds, Rabbi and Antonius maintain a close relationship bound by the share and love of philosophy. The Talmud describes Antonius seeking Rabbi Yehuda's counsel on masters of governance. I was just praying about what was his connection with Israel. Surely there was one, since Israel was within the providence of Rome. And I'm not kidding you. I mean, I haven't gotten anything from Aish in a while. I follow them. I get their articles, and I have for almost 20 years. And this article, I'm just going through Facebook real quick before I get on the road, and bam, that jumped up. And like, it gave me those goosebumps. So
pretty mind blowing.
yeah, it is. It's pretty interesting. But what I'm learning, I'm the Torah, and I'm actually writing. I'm writing a blog on this right now on my 7 commandments. The Torah gave me the will of God, which is Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. And it's given me also Derek Eretz, which I will talk about later. That's the area that degraded right before the flood, before they started committing murder and robbery. But those are most of those are natural to man. Even the rabbi says they're natural laws to man that we should know. But the Torah, the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, is from my Creator, and I'll never forget him. Those are his gift to me, for upon myself accepting the one God of Israel. But the wisdom to live my everyday life comes from the wise of my people, the humanity that's not Israel. And Israel does have it. I've got books of Musar on here and on anger, and I can read it. But when I'm reading this, it gives me ways to accomplish the goal of pushing back the negative traits of lust and greed and anger. And matter of fact, the day before, I love this. I was walking around the warehouse today saying this here. Yesterday's meditation was from Epictetus as well. The enemy of happiness. It is quite impossible to unite happiness with a yearning for what we don't have. And this next thing is what I've been walking around saying. Happiness has all that it wants. So this is something from Epictetus, who was a Roman slave, who later he was a slave for 30 years, and he was let loose after 30 years, and then he became actually one of the great teachers of philosophy, and because he learned so much as a slave, because his slave master was very wealthy. I think he was in the Senate of Rome, and he had to be there, and he saw what all this wealth and what all these men did. This guy actually broke his leg, twisted it till it broke, just for the meanness of it. He was a mean person. And he talks about how poor the wealthy was by looking at all their indulgences and everything that they were doing at the time, and that he was chained in a dungeon in Rome as a slave. He said he was wealthier than all the rich, Romans in Rome, because he had his mind. He has control of his mind. He had joy. Nothing of that outside world controlled him like it controlled everybody else. So I was walking around the warehouse this morning. I was saying this to myself: happiness has all it wants. Happiness it doesn't need any more. So, yeah. I'm going to the ancient Greeks and the Romans and the others that was wisdom, and there's no problem with that, because a lot of this wisdom comes from the blessing of Japheth. God blessed Japheth, the children of Japheth, one of the sons of Noah, with the knowledge of maths and sciences and the arts. And we gain, I mean, like most of all of our geometry and everything comes from Greek and Rome and art and stuff like that. But even the rabbis recognizes the greatness of Japheth as he spread through the world. And Greece was one of the early ones that kind of developed from the migration of Japheth after the flood. So that'd be a good another conversation in the future.
Yeah.
So, but
Okay.
I live in this world. The Torah is the will of God in my life, but I've also got to live as a human and deal with human emotions and human issues. And these, especially Marcus Aurelius, who was an emperor, who he was wealthy and hated the wealth. When other kings would bring him gold and silver, he would push it away. He'd make people take and put it in closets and bins. It wasn't for when he had to go as his position to go sit at the Colosseum while the gladiators were down there, and Christians were being eaten by the lions and stuff. He hated that. You know what he did? He would be there presently because he was the emperor. He had to be there. But he sat there with a scroll of Epictetus and was learning how to control his attitudes, his minds, his thoughts, his desires. So while that was all going on, he was training himself. And I've got his book called Meditations. It's the writings he wrote to himself. Turned out to be one of the greatest books in the world. It's been printed and reprinted for 2,500 years. Is it 2,500? Yeah, almost 2,000 years or so. And it's his own personal reflections on life. So I hope I answered that question.
Oh, you definitely did. I was thinking about it earlier when, knowing you, I know what you've been studying him and others of recent times, and I thought, I wonder if people think that's a good thing to do, being outside of Torah. That that there is wisdom out there that was bestowed upon humanity that aren't Jewish.
Yeah,
and that we can and we use it.
Please don't get me wrong when I say this. I don't say this in a negative light. The Jews wasn't given all the wisdom of the planet. They was given the Torah, the wisdom of the Torah, and all the wisdom around the Torah. But see, we are two distinct peoples. They have a covenant at Sinai. We have a covenant through Noah down through Moses. Our covenant is different. Our restrictions are different. Our dietary laws are different because we have a different mission. And therefore, there are things that the wisdoms on our side of the fence that are kosher. I couldn't tell you when I first started this. I started this on the 18th of January. And from the very first start of it, I just started on the 18th month. I'm constantly writing in here, Epictetus taught this, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov taught it like this, because I've studied Rabbi Nachman. I see a lot of things from the sages in here, and in my journal, I make notes to that. The things that I did learn from Breslov and them that ties to the wisdom. Like the one I'm specifically talking about is one starting a new day. Every day you can start over. And even the Stoics recognize that, yesterday, they teach that we need to meditate on death, not as a morbid thing. Matter of fact, Marcus Aurelius said, don't live as you have endless days ahead of you. Death shadows over you while you're still alive. Do good. Because you could leave life right now. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think. And so there's a similar thing from the rabbis of Israel. It's in the Pirkei Avos, the Ethics of the Fathers, where one of the rabbis tells their student who's asking them, when was the best time to repent? And the rabbi said, the day before you die. Well, what do you mean? We don't know when we're going to die. Okay, then right now. And that's what that is saying. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think. Marcus Aurelius said that. And the rabbi in Pirkei Avos says, repent the day before you die. See how close that wisdom is? It's amazing. So I make these notes in my, you know, they tell you to mark up your books, have a conversation with it. If you don't, you're not read it yet. But these are the things I'm learning, and these are the things I'm trying to remember in my daily life now. And I look at people around me, and I'm going, "That's me there. That's me. I did this. I did this. I do this. I do that." Still, I haven't got some things under control yet. You know, it's going to be years because I'm 60 years old just learning this, and it's an amazing journey walking with God. It is. It's exhilarating. How you say that word? It's exhilarating. I can observe His commandments and I can learn His wisdom. This wisdom, it doesn't come out of dry air. Every human being has the image of God, even if they're a pagan, not knowing the God of Israel. They still have the image of God there, and there's going to be sparks there that's going to let wisdom that comes from the divine, even though they don't know that's where it came from. And then there's stuff you just got to throw it out. Nope, that's from the person. That's like from all of us. We all have stupidity that we do. Anyhow, we went a whole lot longer than I expected. I thought I was going to be done in 30 minutes.
Well, it's good. It doesn't matter.
Well, you do understand I was a former Pentecostal preacher. 45 minutes was an introduction.
It takes what it takes. That's all right.
I'm just kidding. I'm beyond that point, but hey, I can laugh at it.
I come out of the Baptist church over here, and their ministers were only allowed to talk for 20 minutes because people couldn't concentrate, focus after 20 minutes was the belief.
See, they gave us a good excuse. See, at 12 o'clock, the Baptists all let out and filled up the restaurant. So we had to go to 2 o'clock so the Baptists could eat and leave.
Oh, that's good.
Anyhow, it's all fun. It really is. I mean, some people take life too serious, but it's all fun. But hey, guys, anytime I say something, you got questions, just ask me. But in doing like I'm doing this right here, I didn't seek it completely on my own. It was interesting how I came upon this. I didn't even come upon this. I wasn't even looking for it. But this right here was another saying that I got the other day from, who did I get this from? I got this from Ryan Holiday. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. And that has been the story of my life. When I was ready to study conversion to join Israel, my teacher, Rabbi David Steinberg, appeared in my life. I got pictures of the day we actually met. But at that time, I did not know he was going to become my rabbi. When it was time, Pesach Sherbo in Israel became my teacher. And it's different places in my life as I was growing. It's like Hashem provided. Now, I have this guy, Ron Holiday, who I've never met, but I've been reading his stuff and watching his stuff and taking my notes. But he's kind of somewhat my teacher in this. But I didn't just do it on my own. Like I said, I sought this one friend of mine who I know who has multiple degrees in philosophy, who is a very strong Noahide. If you can use that term, I hate the term, but he observer of the 7 laws, him and his wife both. Very stout, very stout. I approached him first because I knew he would know a lot about this. And he gave me some warnings right off the bat. And then we talked about things, and then he seen my direction. I explained my direction. But I've kind of counseled with him a little bit. I've talked with Andy some. I haven't talked with Jacob because Jacob's had his new baby and he's had some health issues. But Jacob is a what I call an elder of mine. So, well, I guess everyone's leaving. It's time to go.
Yep. And before we go, Rabbi Moshe Shulman's Noahide Path. He's doing his lessons on Saturday and Sunday for the Americans and Sunday and Monday for the Southern Hemisphere.
What's his
Oceana.
subject going to be?
Spirituality. He's
Oh.
taken another step away from his focus study, like he did the other week, and he's a lot of things being asked and said. So we figured it was time to explain spirituality. So I think
Okay,
that will be
I'm going
very
to
good.
try my best.
Mm.
I'm going to try my best to be there. I'll probably, what did you say? Is it
It's 7 o'clock Sunday night for you.
7 o'clock Sunday night for me? Yeah, I'll try to be there on
Yeah.
that one.
Yeah. I'll be at all three as usual, helping Dan, and which is good because Dan often has to leave early. So I just take
Right.
over, finish the meeting. But yeah, no, I think it'll be an interesting one. He's mentioned it a few times in the recent past. With the obviously, it's come about because the questions he's being asked. So he's going to give an understanding of what spirituality actually is.
I'm going to be interested in hearing, but Rabbi Moshe's really, really good. I want to hear what he has to say.
It'll be more than yes and no.
Oh, that'll be, we might want to have our cameras out for that one.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyhow,
Well, thanks everybody for joining us.
and hanging in.
Yeah, and email outreachnoah@gmail.com. And we will see you next week with Hashem's help.
All righty.
Okay.
See y'all
night.
later.
Good,
Bye-bye.
Good day, good night, whatever. Yeah. Oh, where is it? There. They changed the box.